She leaned across the dinner table, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "You don't belong in this family," she whispered, her eyes cold and sharp. For a moment, I felt the old shame rising, the years of biting my tongue, shrinking myself to be accepted. But this time, I didn't flinch. Because she didn't know about the inheritance I had been quietly protecting, the one that made me the true pillar of this family. So I stood up, raised my glass, and told them all the truth. Family dinners were always a tense affair in my husband's house. From the outside, it looked like a picture-perfect gathering. Expensive wine, elegant table settings, and laughter echoing through the grand dining room. But underneath the polished silverware and delicate chandeliers, there was a constant undercurrent of judgment, all directed at me. My mother-in-law, Margaret, was the queen of subtle cruelty. She didn't need to shout or make scenes. Her power came from quiet, strategic comments designed to cut deep and leave no obvious trace. From the moment I married her son, she made it clear I wasn't one of them. My family wasn't wealthy, I didn't have the right education, and I didn't understand the unspoken rules of their high society world. I tried for years to win her over. I learned her favorite recipes, complimented her antique collection, even attended charity galas I had no interest in, but nothing was ever enough. That night, the dinner table glittered with candles and crystal glasses. Guests chattered about luxury vacations and designer renovations. I sat quietly, swirling my wine, smiling at all the right moments while feeling like a ghost in my own life. Margaret sat directly across from me, her diamond earrings catching the candlelight every time she turned her head. She wore her usual polite smile, the one that looked warm to outsiders but carried poison in its edges. As dessert arrived, she leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto mine. She lowered her voice so only I could hear. "You don't belong in this family," she whispered. The words sliced through me like a cold knife. My fingers went numb around my dessert fork. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks and my heart pound so loudly that it drowned out the laughter around me. For years, I might have looked down, stayed silent, and swallowed the humiliation like medicine. But tonight was different, because tonight, I wasn't the helpless daughter-in-law she thought I was. A few months before, I had discovered something that changed everything, a secret inheritance from my late grandmother, a fortune she had quietly built through decades of smart investments and hidden away to protect me from the world's cruelty, and perhaps from people like Margaret. When I first found out, I kept it to myself. Part of me felt unworthy. Another part thought I needed to keep playing the role of the quiet outsider. But hearing those words tonight ignited something fierce inside me. As Margaret sat back, her lips curling into a victorious smirk, I realized I was done playing small. I was done shrinking to fit into a family that had never truly wanted me. I set down my fork carefully, took a slow sip of my wine, and looked directly at her. I felt my spine straighten, my shoulders roll back. A calm, electric energy spread through me. I knew what I needed to do. After Margaret's whisper, time seemed to slow down around me. The clinking of glasses, the clatter of cutlery, the polite laughter, it all faded into a distant hum. My entire focus narrowed to that single poisonous sentence replaying in my mind. "You don't belong in this family." I looked around the table. My husband, Daniel, was busy describing his latest business trip to one of his uncles, completely unaware of the silent war unfolding in front of him. His mother's words hadn't reached his ears. They never did. For years, I had protected him from the tension, telling myself I was keeping the peace. I hid the snide comments, the dismissive looks, the whispered insults. But in protecting him, I had been erasing myself. I thought back to my grandmother. She had always told me, "Never let anyone decide your value for you." When she passed, I thought I had lost that guiding voice forever. But then came the letter from her lawyer, revealing the inheritance. It wasn't just money. It was her final act of protection, a gift to make sure I would never have to beg for respect. Margaret thought she had me trapped, financially, emotionally, socially. But she didn't know that in my bank account sat a fortune large enough to buy this entire dinner 10 times over. I felt the heat in my chest shift from shame to something else, resolve. I had spent years folding myself into a version they might accept. Tonight, I decided I would unfold. I turned to Daniel. My voice was calm, almost too calm. "Daniel, could I have your attention for a moment?" He looked at me, surprised, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Of course. Is everything okay?" I stood up slowly, the silk of my dress brushing against my legs. The conversations around the table died one by one until the entire room fell into a sharp, anticipatory silence. "Actually," I said, my voice ringing clear, "there's something I'd like to share with everyone tonight." I watched Margaret's face change from smug amusement to a wary tightness. She sensed something was coming, but couldn't predict what. I took a breath and continued. "For years, I've heard whispers that I don't belong here, that I'm not good enough to be part of this family." I let my gaze sweep over the table. No one dared look away. "But tonight, I think it's time to set the record straight," I said, reaching into my purse. I pulled out a copy of the inheritance letter, a document that detailed not only the amount, but also my grandmother's final wishes for me to use it as I saw fit, free from anyone else's control. Gasps spread around the table as I held it up. "This," I said, "is my inheritance. A gift from my grandmother, who believed in me long before any of you did. She left me enough to secure my future and to remind me that I never needed to earn anyone's approval to belong." Margaret's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Daniel's eyes darted between me and the document, his expression frozen in shock. I felt light, powerful, alive. For the first time in this house, at this table, I wasn't the outsider. I was the woman standing on her own foundation, unshakable and undeniable, and I knew in that moment there was no going back. The dining room was so quiet that I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Margaret stared at me as though I had spoken a foreign language. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted in silent horror. Daniel dropped his napkin onto his plate, his hands trembling slightly. "Wait, what is this? What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice sounding smaller than I had ever heard it. I turned to him, my expression calm and almost gentle. "I'm talking about the truth I've hidden for too long so that all of you could feel comfortable while I swallowed every insult." Margaret tried to regain control. She cleared her throat and forced a brittle smile. "Darling, I think you misunderstand." "No," I interrupted, my voice sharp but steady. "I don't misunderstand. You've made yourself very clear over the years, Margaret, and tonight you finally said it out loud. I don't belong." The guests at the table sat frozen. Some looked at their plates, others watched with wide eyes, afraid to even breathe. I held the letter up again, letting the candlelight catch the embossed seal. "This isn't just money. It's proof that I have always been enough, even when you tried to make me feel small. It's my grandmother's voice telling me I was worth protecting, worth loving, and worth standing up for." Daniel stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" he demanded, his face pale. I met his gaze without flinching. "Because you never asked. You never wanted to know who I really was, only who you needed me to be." He stared at me like I was a stranger. In that moment, I realized he didn't know me at all. Maybe he never had. Margaret finally found her voice, her tone dripping with forced calmness. "You're making a scene. Sit down and stop embarrassing yourself." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Embarrassing myself? The only embarrassment here was the years I had spent trying to win her approval. I turned to the rest of the guests. I apologize for interrupting dinner, but I think it's time I stopped pretending. I won't shrink myself to fit into this family any longer. I don't need to prove anything to anyone here. A hush fell over the table. Then, slowly, I saw a few faces soften. Some even looked relieved, as if they had been waiting for this moment too. I set the letter down gently on my dessert plate, picked up my purse, and stepped back from the table. The silk of my dress whispered against the floor, sounding louder than any insult Margaret had ever thrown at me. Daniel reached for my arm, but I slipped away easily. "I think I'll go home now," I said calmly. Alone. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I walked with steady, deliberate steps past the stunned guests, through the ornate hallway lined with family portraits that never included me, and out into the cool night air. As the door closed behind me, I felt something shift deep in my chest, a sudden, exhilarating lightness. Outside, I took a deep breath and looked up at the stars. For the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing for myself, not for someone else's approval. I smiled to myself, a small, private smile. Tonight wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. As I stepped onto the driveway, the chill of the evening kissed my skin, waking every nerve in my body. I clutched my purse tightly, the inheritance letter still folded neatly inside. Each step felt like a quiet drumbeat echoing through my bones, a reminder that I was finally moving forward on my own terms. I could hear muffled voices from the dining room behind me, frantic and confused. But I didn't turn back. For the first time, I had no desire to check if they were chasing me or to wonder what they thought. Their reactions were no longer my burden. A taxi idled at the end of the driveway, as if the universe had orchestrated it just for me. I approached, opened the door, and slipped inside without a word. The driver looked back in the mirror, his eyes flickering with curiosity. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked. I hesitated for a moment, realizing I hadn't actually thought past the front gate. My life had always been mapped out in small, safe increments. Dinner plans, charity events, birthday obligations. But tonight was different. "Downtown," I said finally. "Anywhere with lights and people." As the taxi pulled away, I leaned my head against the window and watched the mansion disappear behind me. The grand house, the perfectly trimmed hedges, the marble fountain, they all faded into the darkness. I thought of Margaret's voice, cold and precise, always judging, always reminding me of my place. I thought of Daniel's silence over the years, his quiet compliance with her unspoken rules. How many times had I made myself smaller so he wouldn't have to choose between me and his family? The city lights soon replaced the dark suburbs, their bright colors reflecting in my eyes like stars. For the first time in years, I felt the rush of possibility, the wide-open future that was mine alone to shape. I asked the driver to stop near a small hotel I remembered from my early days in the city. It wasn't luxurious, but it felt warm and alive, full of travelers and stories. At the front desk, the receptionist greeted me with a kind smile. "Checking in?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "Just for tonight, maybe longer." She handed me a key card. I took it and felt an unexpected surge of pride. It was a simple thing, a temporary room, but it was mine, chosen by me, free of anyone else's expectations. When I entered the room, I dropped my purse on the bed and stood in the center for a moment, taking it all in. The walls were plain, the bedding simple, but it felt like a sanctuary. I sat down and pulled out the inheritance letter. I read it again, slowly, as if savoring each word for the first time. My grandmother's handwriting seemed to reach across the years, her final gift wrapping around me like a protective embrace. "Use this when you're ready to be fully yourself," she had written. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't feel weak. I felt reborn. I poured myself a glass of water, raised it toward the ceiling, and whispered, "To you, Grandma, and to me." As I drank, I felt a deep, quiet certainty settle in my chest. I wasn't just walking away from a toxic family. I was walking toward the woman I was always meant to become. I woke up in the hotel room with sunlight spilling across the sheets. For a moment, I didn't recognize where I was. There were no heavy drapes, no cold marble floors, no faint echoes of my mother-in-law's footsteps. Just light, warmth, and a quiet that felt like a soft embrace. I sat up slowly, letting the realization sink in. I had finally left, and I had done it on my own terms. I made coffee in the little hotel machine and carried the steaming mug to the window. Below, the city buzzed to life. Early risers jogging past, delivery trucks unloading, baristas setting up sidewalk tables. Everything felt raw and real, alive in a way that the dinners at Margaret's mansion had never been. I checked my phone out of habit. Dozens of missed calls and messages from Daniel, each one more desperate than the last. Margaret, too. Short, sharp texts, demanding explanations, warnings, guilt trips. I turned the phone off and slipped it into a drawer. Today wasn't about them. I spent the morning walking the city streets, letting the noise and color wash over me. I stopped at a little bakery and ordered a croissant and fresh orange juice. I sat at a corner table, people watching, feeling more present than I had in years. At the next table, a group of friends laughed loudly, passing around plates and making toasts over half-empty coffee cups. I found myself smiling at them, thinking about all the tables I had sat at where I never really felt welcome. It hit me then. I didn't need to fight for a seat at someone else's table anymore. I could build my own. When I returned to the hotel, I pulled out my notebook, the one I hadn't dared open in years. It was filled with ideas I had scribbled down secretly: business plans, community projects, travel dreams, things I always told myself I'd pursue someday when it was safe. I flipped through each page, the words now shimmering with possibility rather than fear. One plan stood out: a women's foundation in my grandmother's name, a place to support women who felt voiceless in their own homes, who needed help finding the courage to choose themselves. I traced the outline of that idea with my finger, feeling a spark ignite deep in my chest. Maybe that was what my grandmother meant all along. Not just to use the inheritance to survive, but to thrive and to help others do the same. The afternoon faded into evening, and I found myself back at that bakery, this time with my notebook open and pen in hand. The same group of friends was still there, now joined by even more people. One of them noticed me and raised their glass in my direction, a silent invitation to join. I shook my head politely, smiling. Not today. Today was for me. As I packed up, I felt a lightness in my steps, a sense of forward motion. Back in my room, I poured another glass of water and held it up. "To new tables," I whispered, "and to the women brave enough to build them." I took a long sip, closed my eyes, and saw not Margaret's dining room, not Daniel's worried face, but my grandmother's kind eyes, filled with pride. Tomorrow, I would begin planning. Tomorrow, I would step fully into this new life. But tonight, I allowed myself a simple, beautiful truth. I belong to myself. Sometimes the most powerful seat at the table is the one you build for yourself. Subscribe for more stories of rebirth, courage, and silent victories turned loud.